being single and not having kids is equal. It's an equal life path, and one isn't better than the other. You know, if you end up single and child free, you haven't lost. It's not a consolation prize for getting married and having kids. So really, I feel strongly that the narrative needs to change so that people realize that if you don't have kids or you do have kids, either one of those options, they're the same.
Welcome. My name is Andrea Thiele and I'm your host, and I'm delighted to speak with Lucy Meggeson today.
Exactly. So then tell me, how do you fit into my show? How would you describe yourself and what are you doing?
So my name's Lucy Meggeson. I am 46, not far off 47, and I have a podcast called Spinsterhood Reimagined, which essentially celebrates all things single and child-free, and I am both of those things. So yes, that's how I come to be here.
Awesome. What event or like what kind of like situation triggered you? I know I'm going to jump right in to do that podcast, to have that idea and then to do that.
Well, it's funny. It was so random. So going back, not very far at all, actually, going back to last summer, July, it was July 2021. And at that point, I'd been single now for exactly 6 years. At that point, I'd been single for 4 and a bit, 5 years. And I was sitting outside my flat where I live in southwest London, sitting on the bench. It was this beautiful summer's evening. And I was flicking through like a WhatsApp message with some of my oldest, closest girlfriends, all of whom are like married with kids. And literally, I don't know how much you sort of believe in the divine and in the universe and universal intelligence and kind of spirituality and all that. I'm really, really into all of those things. And I got this, what I call sort of spiritual download. And I suddenly, literally, it came out of nowhere to write a book about being single and child-free. Because it occurred to me on that evening, as I was kind of scrolling through these messages with my sort of best girlfriends, rather than feeling like, oh my God, I'm the only one who is single and doesn't have kids, and oh my God, oh, woe is me, and I'm so depressed about it. All I could think was, am I allowed to swear? I won't swear.
Yes, absolutely.
Well,
Feel free.
Okay. Just had to clarify that because, all I could think was, fuck, I just am in such a great place in myself. And it was just like, it just felt so sort of strong, this feeling, this sort of epiphany of like, I'm just so happy in my position. I don't feel any lack. We will obviously talk about the baby thing because I'm child free, but not necessarily by choice. But anyway, so I had this idea. I'd never had an idea to write a book ever in my life. It had never occurred to me to write a book. But basically, I came back into my flat that evening and I sat down at my desk and I just typed on my laptop. And for about 4 months, it's just like, blur, everything just kind of came out of me in this sort of almost catharsis. It was weird. Anyway, so that was so that was sort of July, August, September, October last year. And in the meantime, I started listening to a podcast which is hosted by an American woman called Kathy Heller, who, funnily enough, I'm currently in her mastermind, and I'm actually going next week. I'm going to a retreat in LA, which is her retreat. Anyway, I started listening to her podcast, and it's called Don't Keep Your Day Job. And basically what Don't Keep Your Day Job is about is, you know, the title sort of gives it away. It's basically about, you know, get rid of your day job and do what you really love. And one thing that this woman talks about a lot is how much podcasting has brought to her life, and it's sort of transformed her life. And it's just been this, you know, amazing thing. And she's basically, you know, on lots of episodes, she basically talks about the fact that, you know, anyone could do a podcast. We should all be doing a podcast. Like, it's this amazing opportunity. I have a background, just to sort of rewind, I have a background in production at BBC Radio 2. So I did that for many years previous to this. So I sort of had that kind of technical background, like I know how to edit quickly. And actually, before I started my own podcast, I was editing somebody else's podcast, a podcast called As Good As It Gets, which is now no longer going. But anyway, so Kathy Heller talked about starting a podcast, and I just suddenly thought one day, oh my God, I could start a podcast on the same subject, on the subject of being single and child free. But what I will say is the sort of couple of years leading up to that point, I have been and still am on a bit of a sort of a spiritual journey, a sort of personal growth journey, which has made me change a lot of things in my life and has really sort of affected the way that I see the world in a good way, and the way that I think and the way that I behave and what I do and what I don't do. And that journey has sort of given me courage and sort of self-belief and just self-love and self-confidence that I didn't really have before. You know, I was full of all sorts of limiting beliefs about I'm not good enough. And actually, when I was going back to Radio 2, when I was at Radio 2, I secretly wanted to be behind the microphone. I wanted to be talking into the mic. You know, I wanted my own kind of music show, because music's always been my sort of passion. Anyway, so because of all this personal development work that I had been doing in the couple of years leading up to the point where I started the podcast, I got to a point where I had enough confidence and courage to just go, fuck it, I'm going to do this. Whereas 5 years ago, I would have sort of said, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to start a podcast. I mean, there's just no way, because people will laugh at me and I'll feel like an idiot. And anyway, so I made a decision. And as soon as I made the decision, I started telling people, because I was sort of, you know, that's my way of holding myself accountable to something that I've said I'm going to do. And then I committed myself to a date, which was 22/2/22, of February 22, all the twos, which was very deliberate, if you believe in things like angel numbers. Excuse me. But yeah, and so then I set up an Instagram account, and then I sent out an email in January to everyone I knew, all my sort of friends, family, everyone I'd ever worked with, people I hadn't been in contact with for, 5 years. I just sent everyone an email saying, hey guys, I'm starting a podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, because I have no followers. And I just I started. And basically I was launching in the February, and in the sort of 2 or 3 months before that, I started recording episodes and reaching out to guests, because I wanted to start with at least sort of 6, 7, 8 episodes to begin with. And here I am. And before I know it, it's going to be a freaking year. And I started off doing 1 episode a week on a Tuesday with a guest, and I now do 2 episodes a week. I do my Tuesday episode, which is normally with a guest, although sometimes it's just a solo episode. And I now also do a Saturday mini-sode every Saturday, where I talk about all kinds of crap, basically.
Awesome. I have to say, your podcast is amazing. I really enjoyed it. I was kind of like binge listening to it, and you have such amazing guests. And yes, it's really cool. It's really cool. I already told like a bunch of my friends that they should listen to you.
Oh, bless you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Just quickly, because I know a lot of my listeners also either are doing a podcast or want to do a podcast. What's like one thing, one takeaway after like 1 year almost, like one quick tip that you would give people starting out a podcast?
Do you know what the best advice I could give is? Just do it, and do it messy. Don't worry about being perfect, because it's never going to be perfect. And if we wait to start these things, then we never start. And I would say it just takes a little bit of courage. You've just got to put something out there. But yeah, really just show up and do it messy, because it's actually about your energy more than what you're actually saying. It's about the vibe that you're giving off. It's about the energy that you're giving off. That's what people are attracted to, more than, oh, well, she speaks so perfectly and articulately and la 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 la. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would be what I would say.
And also, I mean, because I know a little bit about you, that you said, you just ask anybody to be on your podcast, right? You don't have any fear of, because I think that's also like the barrier of asking people. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, well, I think that probably comes from my background at Radio 2, because I had to sort of reach out to kind of celebs there. So I sort of, it wasn't as if I'd never, ever done that. Also, it's just, it's just the kind of person I am. That, there are a lot of things that scare me in life, but asking someone to be a guest on my podcast doesn't really scare me, because what's the worst that can happen? Someone's going to say no. And I
Right.
get a lot of no's. Obviously, I get a lot, there's people I've asked who have said no. But that's another piece of advice I would give, actually, is to not take offense when people say no. Like, I had a no from someone who I really wanted on. I probably shouldn't mention who it was, but anyway, they've got a podcast about being child free, and I really wanted this woman on. And she said no, which was completely fair enough, because she's really busy, and I'm not her freaking priority. I get it. But I think it's that thing of, you can't let somebody, you can't let a few no's put you off, because it's like anyone successful in life. I'm not saying I'm successful, but anyone who does anything in life, you get to where you want by just taking the failures on the chin, because success is just further down the road beyond your failures. So yeah, I'll ask anyone. I mean, I've left quite sort of well-known people Instagram voice notes going, "Hi, I'm Lucy. I live in London. Blah, 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 blah. Do you fancy me?" And most of them I haven't heard back from, but some of them I have.
Awesome. Plus, it's such a popular topic also, right?
I think, well, it's growing. That's the thing, the conversation around spinster. I mean, it's such an awful word, isn't it? And I would never introduce myself to someone as a spinster, ever. I mean, it's an awful word, and I would never say, "Hi, I'm Lucy, I'm a spinster." I mean, of course not. But
Exactly. That's why what I'm saying, like some celebrities, they might be like, "Oh my God, I don't know. What is your..."
I know totally, because of course because I mean, I sometimes think, shit, someone's going to see the name Spinsterhood Reimagined and be like, "Oh my God, I don't want to be in a podcast called Spinsterhood Reimagined." But of course they don't. I mean, the whole point of it being called Spinsterhood Reimagined is that I want to reimagine the word. Let's make it cool, because actually there are so many cool things about being single and not having kids. So many cool things.
Yeah. What kind of stigma do you encounter? Do you encounter stigma around your singlehood? You're not having any children. How is it in?
I definitely have. And I'm trying to think of something specific. I mean, it's just that thing where, you might be at a party, or you might be at a dinner, and it's just that sort of automatic kind of element of surprise, and sort of, and also I've found there's that sort of automatic, and it's the same with, just why are you single? It's that sort of element of pity. People automatically assume that if you are single and if you don't have kids and you're my age, 46, that, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, no, really, you don't have to be sorry. So, I mean, I suppose that's inherent in the stigma, isn't it? Because, and yes, so I suppose, rather than, I'm not being very, answering this question very well, but it's just a sort of general feeling that I've had over the years, particularly sort of, I suppose, when I got to my kind of mid-30s, people are just surprised. I mean, I've done jobs, but not so much actually Radio 2, not at all, because Radio 2 is a very, there are a lot of different kinds of people who work there. There are people who are single, there are people who are married with kids, there are people who are gay, there are people who are bi, there are people who, whatever. So people aren't so judgmental. But in other sort of environments where people can perhaps be a bit more judgmental, there is just that, it's just that look in people's eyes, and you just think, here we go, I know what you're thinking. And the frustration that I find, and this is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this podcast, is because there is so much to celebrate about not having kids and being single, but obviously talking about not having kids here, but there are so many advantages that come along with it, and there are so many opportunities that come along with it, not to mention freedom. Like, why is this not being celebrated more? Why are we not talking about this more? And I think people are so programmed, and because we've all grown up since we were little girls to, like, we're going to get married and we're going to have babies, and that is obviously where we're going to go, because that's what you do. Right. People always tend to come down on the side of oh God, how sad and how terrible that you don't have babies, rather than, God, let's actually just think and use our brains for a minute about how, the benefits and the advantages, of which there are so many.
Yeah, absolutely. 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 What do you think sometimes stigma is also, it's like a two-edged sword in a way that we have it also within us? And that's why we sometimes, because you just said that, oh, I know what you're thinking, right?
Yeah.
And we sometimes do we know what they're thinking, or do we assume something because we think something, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good
And
question. I have asked myself this question about myself, because I think I definitely have a tendency to do that, just sort of assume that someone is thinking something when they're not, or you certainly don't have proof that they are.
Mhm.
But I suppose it's all sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's all kind of mixed in, isn't it? The fact that we think that ourselves, but the reason we assume that people are thinking that is because of what a lot of people are thinking.
Right.
But yes, for sure, I've definitely had moments where I've thought, am I just paranoid and actually no one gives a shit?
No, no, but I get it. But I think there's something, that we have been like a narrative that we have been fed since we like grow up, through movies and through a lot of like just stories, right? And how we're supposed to be, that this is just within us. It's just like there's a part of us that is like, it doesn't even mean that we wish that to be, but we think that's the normal way to be. And then sometimes if that doesn't match, it's kind of confusing almost, right?
Yeah,
And then we see something, we like maybe are more receptive to certain ideas or certain things or situations than if we didn't have that. So I'm asking myself this constantly in a way.
yeah.
And so my question to you would be like, if you are in such a situation where you do feel like this, is there something that you do? Like, what would be one thing for you to snap out of it?
Say that again. Sorry. If
Like,
I
if you kind of like, encounter certain like stigma or something, like, or like a feeling, that maybe there's something, or do you never have that feeling that there's something that is like, it's supposed to be different, or it's supposed to, or it like kind of like hurt you a little bit because somebody
yeah,
like looked at you a little strange. Maybe they were thinking this, maybe not.
I think now, and I think certainly in the last few years, I almost think that I sort of have got to a point where I'm just like, I won't play into it, but I don't really care anymore. That I have had moments where I have cared more. But as I've sort of grown myself, and ironically, as I've got older, and as the possibility of me having a kid has sort of, faded further and further and further away, because, let's face it, I'm nearly 47. Um,
Mhm.
there's Ironically, I think there's a freedom that comes with it just not being an option anymore. And
Mhm.
also, especially now that I've started the podcast, I don't think people would dare to sort of say, anyone who knows I do this podcast probably just wouldn't dare to say anything that would make me feel bad about not having kids. I mean,
Yeah.
take my mum, and don't get me wrong, my mum has never made me feel bad about not having kids, but completely naturally, I think she's always felt, oh, I just want her to settle down and have a baby and be happy.
Mhm.
And the funny thing and the really interesting thing is that since I've been doing the podcast, I think my mum has come to realize that I'm just fine and I'm great.
Mhm.
She listens religiously, like every week, on the Tuesday episode and the Saturday episode. And I think she's finally realized that I'm okay on my own, and I don't, it doesn't necessarily have to look how everybody, or the vast majority of people, expects your life to look. Also, I've got to say that, and maybe I've always had sort of a little bit of the rebel in me, but there's a part of me that actually quite likes being different.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, when I was talking about playing into it, that's what I was trying to say, that in some ways I think I play into the idea that I'm different because, well, yeah, I am. And isn't that great? Because isn't it interesting? Isn't it more interesting? And who wants to be the same as everybody else? I don't. So now I kind of embrace it even more. And of course, as the podcast hopefully grows and grows and grows, and the longer I do it for, and the more people I meet, the more empowered I feel because of the people I'm having conversations with about it, because there are so many of us out there. And there are so many of us out there who are celebrating it, and who, rather than sort of, lying on the floor in the fetal position, kind of wailing, we're actually having a great time.
Yeah. Absolutely. It does feel empowering. Yeah. And that's the possibility of this day and age, right? Where we can connect like via podcasts and Zoom. It's so easy. Yeah. That's great. But you said also that you're not like 100% child free. You're more like, would you want to share something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I can do for sure. So my story is that whilst I very much consider myself to be child free, I am not child free by choice. So, but what I will say is I didn't choose to not have kids, but by the same token, I didn't choose to have kids. And what I mean by that is, in my last 3 or 4 long-term relationships, all of those relationships, bar the most recent one, which I won't talk about because it was just a disaster from start to finish, and thank God I didn't get pregnant with him. But my previous sort of 3 boyfriends, it was looking like it would have gone down the marriage and babies route, but I ended up walking away for reasons I won't bore you with. It just didn't feel right. I just didn't feel like I wanted to commit to the rest of my life. And I ended up I ended up ending those sort of 3 long-term relationships. But the funny thing with me was that I never felt broody until I hit 40. People would talk about broodiness. People would, I'd hear my friends for years sort of talk about being broody, and I'd be like, what the fuck is this feeling that everyone's talking about? I can't relate to this feeling of like this kind of yearning and this sort of inner blah, 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 blah. And then I turned 40 and it was like, boom, holy shit, this is the feeling that everyone's been talking about. And since then, it's added a sort of a new layer, because I've suddenly been sort of grappling with feelings of, really, really, really strong feelings of broodiness over the last 3-4 years, quite majorly. And of course, the last 3-4 years I've been single. But what I will say is that whilst I have been feeling incredibly broody, physiologically, biologically, if I'd really, really, really wanted to have a baby, I could have made it happen. I could have adopted, or I could have moved back home to Dorset and lived with my mum, and had a baby, or whatever. I could have, if I'd really, the point I'm trying to make is, if I'd really felt that having a baby was my calling in life, I could have made it happen. But I subconsciously, I think, just chose not to. But at the moment, I still do have incredibly strong feelings of broodiness, and I'm sort of, it's this weird kind of head to head between what my mind wants, and I know what I want for my life, which is not to have a baby, but then what my body wants. But actually my mind, my brain can separate the two things, because A, I know that those feelings are going to dissipate eventually, and B, they're not that bad, and they only happen when I'm kind of faced with a baby, or faced with a toddler, or I'll be sort of scrolling through YouTube and I'll sort of see like a reel with a really cute baby, and I'm like, oh my God. But great thing is, and the reason I say that I am 99% child free, or I am 100% child free really, the great thing is that as soon as I'm not confronted with that baby, or not looking at that reel of that cute toddler, my brain is going, do I actually want a baby? No, I bloody do not. Because I honestly can't think of anything worse than adding a baby into my life right now, because it would just blow the whole thing up. I'd be like, oh my God. And whilst I think it's great that, you know, babies are great and everyone's welcome to babies, but I have got to a point where I know myself so well. I know myself so much better than I used to. And what I do know is that I was put on this planet to do more than have a not do more than have a baby, but to that was not my calling. That is not my calling, because if it had been my calling, I'd have made it happen, because I could have made it happen multiple times and I didn't. So a very long-winded answer to your question. I'm not sure it was even particularly clear.
It is clear. What is clear in this anyway, right? It's your story. That was your story.
Yeah.
That is like, that is, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
No worries.
And so you said also the Spinsterhood Reimagined podcast is kind of like a career shift for you. Is it like a pivot, or it's like a new beginning? And what is your long-term goal? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I've had, oh gosh, I'll very, very briefly give you the very brief story. So going back to my Radio 2 days, music is my number one passion, always has been, which is what led me to wanting to work for Radio 2. Very long story short, as I say, I bust a gut for several years to get into Radio 2. I worked there for free. It was like I made a decision. I want to work for Radio 2 because it's the biggest music station in Europe and they make all the brilliant music documentaries. And I just made this decision that I wanted to work for Radio 2. I worked my ass off for several years. I did kind of, you know, weekends for free, holidays, bank holidays, Christmas, New Year's, everything. And I sort of fought my way in there. I refused to give up, and I eventually landed a full-time job, which was awesome. In the meantime, I got together with a guy who I met through, he just doesn't work at Radio 2, but I met him through that world. Awful relationship for 2.5 years. This is going to sound so crazy and it's so random, but I was looking to get away from this relationship. And one of my other interests in life has always, I did a psychology degree at university, and one of my long-term interests has been how the mind works, and more specifically how the criminal mind works. So, I mean, this is going to sound insane, because it was slightly insane, I'm not going to lie, but I was sat at my desk at Radio 2 one day, and one of the other shows that I used to sit in the office with, they were doing a feature on the Met, which is the London Metropolitan Police, who were doing a new initiative whereby you could join the Met directly as a detective instead of going down the kind of traditional route where you had to, you know, become a uniformed policeman and blah, 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 blah. And I was sat at my desk and I heard this and I was like, oh my God, because I'd always thought that being a detective would be like super cool and really interesting. And it just sort of married my kind of, you know, love of or interest in criminals and how their minds work and all that. Anyway, I applied and I got accepted onto this scheme. So I left Radio 2, which was the hardest decision I'd ever made in my life. And what I will say is that had I not been in that relationship, I probably would still be at Radio 2. But I, to be quite frank, was not in my right mind at the time. I wasn't thinking clearly at all. And I just felt like if I could get away from that job, i.e. Radio 2, this job that I, you know, wanted for so long and was so passionate about, but I wasn't thinking clearly. This relationship had kind of taken over my life and my mind and my soul, and I just wanted to escape. So I applied for this job and I got accepted. So I then became a freaking detective for about 5 minutes, and I hated it. I know, it's fucking nuts. It's nuts. I hated it. I absolutely hated it with a passion. And I don't use the word hate lightly, because I don't actually really like using that word, but I freaking hated it. And I basically did sort of less than 2 years. I did like 6 months training, and then I was posted and I was, you know, essentially working as a detective. And it was awful. So I got the bloody hell out in the middle of COVID. My mum was like, oh my God, what are you doing? You know, because I'd just given up one career and now I was going to give up another career in the middle of COVID, like crazy. But one thing I will say about myself is that I've always, always, always followed my intuition, and I've always followed my heart, because I know myself and I know what I want and I know what I don't want. And so the most important thing to me at that point, albeit it was in the middle of COVID and no one was leaving jobs because people were losing jobs, I handed my notice in and decided to get a job in a coffee shop, which is what I do now. And I became my sister's cleaner. So I've literally been cleaning my sister's house for the last year and a half and working part-time in a coffee shop, starting this podcast. But my long-term plan is to expand the podcast, hopefully monetize it. And also I've started doing a bit of coaching work with women who are single and child-free. I'm currently running a coaching course, a 6-week coaching course, about how to upgrade your spinster mindset. Because whilst I'm not a trained coach, I feel fully equipped to take women from a place of feeling a bit shit about it to feeling a whole lot better. I'm also writing a book, as you know. But the book that I started writing last year in summer of 2021 has kind of gone on the back burner because I've been approached by a publishing company to write a very different book. So I'm currently sort of working on that to see whether, hopefully I'll get a publishing deal, which will be awesome. So God knows what will become of me, but I feel excited because I know one thing. I tell you, one thing I do know is that I love hosting a podcast. I absolutely love it. So I'm kind of following my joy in the faith that is going to take me where I'm supposed to go. Although, yeah, who knows where the hell that is.
Great. That's an amazing story. Wow.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Slightly crazy, but hey.
Hey, this is like, when you have like the #1 podcast in that field, and then looking back, this will be like such a great story, right? This is
I
how
hope
I
so.
always approach life. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So where do you see, just quickly, what do you see, what kind of opportunity do you see actually in that field, like child-free and maybe spinsterhood reimagined, and in that kind of like evolution? I call it like the evolution of the female identity. What do you see happening and what needs to happen? Like, if you can quickly,
Yeah, well, I think that this conversation is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and there are more people, like yourself. It feels to me as if there is some kind of movement that is happening at the moment. And I probably wouldn't have noticed had I not started a podcast, because I'm now discovering all of these people. There are, more books being written, more podcasts being started, more documentaries being made, blah, 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 blah. So I just really feel like we need to keep having these kinds of conversations to get to a place where one of my main messages of the podcast is I want it to be known to the world and his wife. Funny, it's called The World and His Wife. But I want it to be known that being single and not having kids is equal. It's an equal life path, and one isn't better than the other. If you end up single and child free, you haven't lost. It's not a consolation prize for getting married and having kids. So really, I feel strongly that the narrative needs to change so that people realize that if you don't have kids or you do have kids, either one of those options, they're the same in terms of the level that they exist on. They're just different, and it's as simple as that. So that is what I think, that's what I feel needs to happen, what I hope is going to happen.
Wow. Yes. I have the same feeling, and I think absolutely we need to change the narrative, and you are doing that by hosting a podcast like this.
Hopefully.
And yes, it's happening.
Yeah.
Give me like one, since you're also like into self-development, maybe you have like one quick tip for our listeners, like some mindset shift that is like that you really like, that you use for yourself to set up yourself for success, or to even like maybe to get over your spinsterhood bad ideas? I don't know, how would you call these spinsterhood
I suppose just, I mean, ideas and narratives and stories that we just tell ourselves because of, A, we're telling them ourselves, and B, we're sort of hearing them through society. I think my biggest thing that I would say to people who are trying to upgrade their mindsets, which is, as I say, what I hopefully will be coaching people on more. The first and most, where it all starts.
Sorry. Yeah.
I think where it all starts, the first and most important thing that you need to do is start becoming aware of your thoughts. Yeah. Because we all have between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day. Most of those thoughts are scarily on repeat. We're thinking the same thoughts every day. And a lot of those thoughts are negative. And because we're thinking the same thoughts every day, which all come from our subconscious, and many of those thoughts come from very, very limiting beliefs that we have sort of picked up in our childhood and we've carried through into our adulthood, and we don't even realize it. We don't even realize that the reason we're thinking and feeling the things that we're thinking and feeling, and therefore acting the way that we're acting, and therefore getting the results that we're getting, is because we're really held back by limiting beliefs. So I would say my one top tip would be, get aware of your thoughts, start noticing what you are thinking, and check in with yourself as to where your head's at and how you're feeling. And actually, one of the most useful sort of tools that I do is I listen to, I really think that positive affirmations are awesome. I have recorded about 15 minutes worth of me speaking out positive affirmations, and I listen to them every single morning. And I swear to God, they start shifting your beliefs, because what we literally need to be doing is reprogramming our subconscious. And the great thing about the mind is that it's very elastic, and we can reprogram. Literally, we can reprogram the neurotransmitters. We can tell ourselves a different story. So a way to start doing that is to record positive affirmations, starting preferably with I am worthy, I am successful, I am, happy being single, and I am happy not having kids, blah, blah, blah. And if you listen to them first thing in the morning, that's when your subconscious brain is very receptive. And if you do, I mean, that's only one thing of many, but if you do that, and if you listen to affirmations at the same time as just starting to become more conscious of your thoughts, little by little, over time, it doesn't happen overnight. You've got to do this for, weeks and months. Things start to shift, and then you slowly start to feel differently. But like I say, that's just one little thing that I would say that people could start doing.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for being on our show here.
You're so
thank
welcome.
you. That was amazing. So how can we find you? Do you want to give, like, how can we find you? How can we find out about your course, your podcast?
Yeah. So the main, I mean, Christ, I'm so like, Instagram is a job in itself. Basically, Instagram is really the only social media that I try and be consistent on. And you can find me at Spinsterhood Reimagined on Instagram. I'm also on Twitter, but I've got about 5 followers and I don't do anything on Twitter. I have a website, which is lucymeggeson.com. And you can send me a message through that, or you can email me. My address is lucy@lucymeggeson.com, and Meggeson is spelt MEGGESON. So lucy@lucymeggeson.com, but mainly send me a DM on Instagram at Spinsterhood Reimagined. And the podcast is called Spinsterhood Reimagined. And you can find it, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the usual places.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.